After 3 weeks living with my daughter-in-law and her parents, she slapped me and said, "Clean that floor properly." Everyone laughed while I held back my tears. When my military son walked through the door, they started screaming. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Evelyn, and at 66 years old, I never imagined I'd be scrubbing someone else's kitchen floor while biting back tears of humiliation. But here I was on my hands and knees in my daughter-in-law's parents' house, trying to make the linoleum shine, while Brittany stood over me like a prison guard. "You missed a spot right there," she said, pointing with her perfectly manicured finger to a corner I'd already cleaned twice. Her voice carried that sweet tone she used when other people were around, but her eyes held nothing but contempt. 3 weeks. That's how long I've been living in this house, since I lost everything. 3 weeks since the medical bills from my late husband's cancer treatment finally caught up with me, forcing the bank to take our home of 39 years. 3 weeks of sleeping in a cramped guest room that smelled like mothballs and feeling like an unwelcome burden. My son Michael had been deployed overseas when it all happened. By the time he returned and found out about my situation, I was already homeless. Brittany had graciously offered to let me stay with them at her parents' house until we could figure something out. What I didn't realize was that figuring something out meant turning me into their personal housekeeper. Mrs. Evelyn, could you clean the bathroom upstairs when you're done here?" Brittany's mother, Linda, called from the living room where she sat watching her soap operas. "The toilet needs a good scrubbing." "Of course," I replied quietly, my knees aching against the hard floor. I was grateful to have a roof over my head, I kept telling myself. I had to be grateful. But gratitude was becoming harder to swallow each day. Yesterday, Brittany had criticized the way I folded her laundry. The day before, she'd made me redo the dishes because one glass still had water spots. And this morning, she'd handed me a list of chores written in her precise handwriting, as if I were hired help instead of her husband's mother. "You know," Brittany said, settling into a kitchen chair and scrolling through her phone while I worked, "whenever it gets back from this training exercise, we really need to discuss your long-term plans. This arrangement was supposed to be temporary." My hands stilled on the mop handle. "I understand. I'm looking into some options." "Good. Because honestly, having an extra person in the house is really stressful for everyone, especially someone who," she paused, making a show of choosing her words carefully, "requires so much assistance." Assistance. As if asking for a place to sleep after losing everything I'd worked for my entire life was some kind of favor I didn't deserve. I wanted to remind her that I'd raised Michael completely alone after his father walked out when he was just 9 years old. That I'd worked 3 jobs to put him through school to give him the opportunities that led him to his military career. That I'd sacrificed my own dreams, my own comfort, my own future to make sure my son had everything he needed. But I said nothing. I just kept cleaning. "Oh, and Evelyn." Brittany's voice turned even sweeter, which I'd learned was always a bad sign. "Could you be more careful with the dishes? I noticed you chipped one of Mother's good plates yesterday." I hadn't chipped anything, but I nodded anyway. "I'll be more careful." The afternoon dragged on with more of the same. Clean this, organize that. Make sure you don't touch the expensive items. By evening, my back was screaming, and my hands were raw from all the cleaning solutions, but I'd managed to complete everything on Brittany's list. I was just finishing mopping the entryway when I heard voices from the living room. Brittany's parents had invited some neighbors over for coffee, and I could hear them laughing about something. Then I caught fragments of their conversation. "Such a burden. Don't know how long we can. Never thought we'd have to deal with my chest tightened." They were talking about me. I tried to focus on the mop, on the rhythmic motion of cleaning anything, to drown out their words. "Evelyn." Brittany's voice cut through my concentration. "Could you bring some coffee to our guests?" I dried my hands and prepared a tray with their best china. the pieces I had been warned not to touch unless absolutely necessary. My hands trembled slightly as I carried it to the living room, where 4 neighbors sat chatting with Brittany's parents. "Oh, how wonderful," one of the women said as I set down the tray. "You're so lucky to have help around the house." Linda laughed. "Well, it's a temporary arrangement. Evelyn here lost her home and needed somewhere to stay." The way she said it made it sound like I was some charity case they'd picked up off the street. Heat rushed to my cheeks, but I managed a polite smile and retreated to the kitchen. I was putting away the coffee supplies when I heard Linda's voice again. Louder now. "The poor thing tries to help, but honestly, she's not used to maintaining a proper household. Yesterday, she used the wrong cleaner on my hardwood floors." More laughter. My hands clenched around the coffee canister. "Mother, be nice," Brittany chimed in, but her tone held no real reproach. "She's doing her best. Though I have to admit it's been quite an adjustment having someone who doesn't know our routines." "Of course, dear. We're just grateful we can help family in need." Family in need. As if I were some distant relative they barely knew instead of the woman who'd raised the man Brittany had married. I finished cleaning up and was heading toward the stairs when Brittany appeared in the hallway. "Oh, Evelyn, one more thing. Could you clean this floor again? I just noticed some spots you missed." I looked down at the entryway I just finished mopping. It was spotless. "I don't see any right there." She pointed to an area that looked exactly like the rest of the floor. And there, in that corner, looked streaky. Something in her tone made me look up. There was a glint in her eyes, a satisfied smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. She was enjoying this. "Of course," I said quietly, turning back toward the supply closet. "Actually," Brittany's voice stopped me. "Let's make sure you do it right this time." She followed me to the closet and watched as I pulled out the mop and bucket again. My knees protested as I knelt down to wring out the mop, and I had to grip the bucket handle to steady myself as I stood back up. "You know, Evelyn," Brittany said conversationally as I began mopping the same floor for the 3rd time that day, "I really think you need to put more effort into this. A job worth doing is worth doing well, don't you think?" I nodded, focusing on the floor. The voices from the living room had grown louder, more animated. Someone was telling a funny story, and everyone was laughing. I mean, when I was growing up, my mother taught me that if you can't do something properly, you shouldn't do it at all. Brittany's voice was getting sharper now, losing its fake sweetness. "Maybe that's why you're in this situation in the first place." The mop froze in my hands. "Excuse me, I'm just saying." Brittany shrugged, examining her nails. "Maybe if you'd been better at managing your finances or taking care of your home or planning for the future, you wouldn't need to depend on other people now." Each word hit me like a physical blow. The implication that somehow I was responsible for my husband's cancer, for the medical bills that had consumed our savings, for the economy that had made it impossible to keep up with everything. "I did my best," I said quietly. "Did you, though?" Brittany tilted her head, studying me like I was an interesting specimen. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you made a lot of poor choices that led you here." The laughter from the living room seemed to mock me. Now here I was, a woman who'd worked her entire life, who'd raised a son to be a good man, who'd been married for 42 years to a man I loved with all my heart, being lectured by a woman half my age about poor choices. "You're working too slowly," Brittany said suddenly. "The guests can see you from the living room doorway, and it's embarrassing. They probably think we don't know how to properly supervise domestic help." Domestic help. The words stung more than any slap could have. I tried to work faster, but my aging body wasn't cooperating. My knees ached, my back screamed, and my hands were cramping from gripping the mop handle too tightly. "This is ridiculous," Brittany muttered loud enough for me to hear. "You can't even clean a simple floor properly." That's when it happened. As I was struggling to maneuver the mop around the corner near the front door, Brittany suddenly stepped forward. "Move!" she said sharply, and before I could react, her hand connected with my cheek in a sharp slap that echoed through the hallway. The shock of it sent me stumbling backward. The mop clattered to the floor, and I had to grab the wall to keep from falling. My cheek burned, and tears sprang to my eyes before I could stop them. "Clean this floor right." Brittany's voice was no longer sweet at all. It was hard, cruel, full of a viciousness I'd only seen glimpses of before. "And stop being so pathetic about it." The voices from the living room had stopped. I could feel eyes on us, and when I glanced toward the doorway, I saw Linda and her guests staring. But instead of shock or concern, I saw amusement on their faces. One of them was actually smiling. "Oh my," Linda said with a little laugh. "Brittany certainly knows how to handle difficult situations." Another guest chuckled. "Sometimes you have to be firm with people who don't understand boundaries." They were laughing. These people were watching a 66-year-old woman get slapped by her daughter-in-law, and they were laughing about it. I stood there frozen, my hand pressed to my burning cheek, trying to process what had just happened. The humiliation was complete. I wasn't just unwelcome here. I was entertainment. Brittany bent down and picked up the mop, shoving it back into my hands. "Try again," she said coldly, "and this time, do it right." I took the mop with shaking hands, my vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. Not in front of them. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. As I knelt back down on the floor, I'd already cleaned perfectly twice. I heard the sound of a car door slamming outside. Then footsteps on the front porch, heavy, familiar footsteps. The front door opened, and there stood my son Michael in his military fatigues, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He'd come home early from his training exercise. His eyes took in the scene, me on my knees with a mop, tears threatening to spill down my cheeks, my face still red from the slap. Brittany standing over me with her arms crossed. The guests in the living room doorway, some still smiling. What the hell is going on here? Michael's voice was deadly quiet, but I could hear the fury building underneath. And that's when Brittany and her family started screaming. "What the hell is going on here?" Michael's voice exploded through the hallway like thunder. I'd never heard my son sound like that before, not even as a child when he was at his angriest. This was the voice of a man who'd seen combat, who'd commanded troops who wouldn't tolerate any form of nonsense. But Brittany, instead of backing down, immediately went into full victim mode. "Michael, thank God you're home," she cried, rushing toward him with tears suddenly streaming down her face. "Your mother has been so difficult. I don't know what to do anymore." Difficult. Michael's eyes were fixed on me, still kneeling on the floor, with the mop in my hands, my cheeks still burning from her slap. "What do you mean, difficult? She won't listen to anything I say." Brittany continued, her voice taking on that whining tone she used when she wanted sympathy. "I try to help her, to give her simple tasks, to make her feel useful, but she argues with everything. And just now she was being so disrespectful, I had to—" "You had to what?" Michael's voice dropped to that dangerous quiet again. He stepped closer to me, and I saw his jaw clench as he noticed the red mark on my cheek. "Did you hit my mother?" "I barely touched her," Brittany protested. "She was being completely unreasonable, and I just—" "You hit my mother." The explosion was so sudden and so loud that everyone in the room jumped. Linda's coffee guests scrambled to gather their things, suddenly very interested in leaving. But Michael wasn't done. "Mom, get up from there," he said to me, his voice gentler, but still shaking with rage. "Right now." I struggled to my feet, my knees protesting after all the time I'd spent on that floor. Michael immediately took my arm to steady me, and the gentleness of his touch, compared to the fury in his voice, made my throat tight with emotion. Now, he said, turning back to Brittany, explain to me why my mother was on her hands and knees, scrubbing your floor like a servant. She's not a servant, Linda interjected from the living room doorway, clearly trying to salvage the situation. She's family. She was just helping around the house while she stays here helping. Michael looked around the pristine entryway, then back at his wife. This floor is spotless. Why was she cleaning it? Because she missed spots the first time, Brittany said, lifting her chin defiantly. I'm just trying to maintain standards in this house. Standards. Michael repeated the word slowly, like he was tasting something bitter. And your standards include hitting a 66-year-old woman. I told you I barely touched her. I can see the handprint on her face. That's when Brittany made her biggest mistake. Instead of apologizing, instead of showing any remorse at all, she crossed her arms and said, well, maybe if she'd do things right the first time, I wouldn't have to correct her. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Linda's remaining guests seemed to sense that something terrible was about to happen. Correct her. Michael's voice was so quiet now that everyone had to strain to hear it. Did you just say you needed to correct my mother? Michael, honey, you don't understand how challenging this has been. No, you don't understand. He stepped closer to Brittany, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw real fear in her eyes. This woman raised me completely alone after my father walked out on us when I was 9 years old. Do you know what she did to support us? Brittany didn't answer, but her face was starting to pale. She worked 3 jobs. Michael continued, his voice getting stronger with each word. 3 jobs, Brittany. She cleaned office buildings at night, worked in a factory during the day, and took in laundry on weekends. Also, I could have food on the table and clothes on my back. Michael, please. I started to say, but he held up a hand. No, Mom. She needs to hear this. He turned back to Brittany. Do you know why she worked in that factory? Because it paid 75 cents more per hour than the other jobs she could get. Do you know what happened in that factory? I felt my chest tighten. I'd never told Michael the full story about my accident. She lost 3 fingers in a machine accident when I was 16. Michael said, his voice cracking slightly. 3 fingers because the safety equipment was broken, and she was too afraid to complain about it because she needed that job to pay for my school clothes. Brittany's eyes widened. She'd never known about my accident, about the fingers I'd lost. I'd always worn gloves or kept my hands positioned so she wouldn't notice. And did she ever complain? Michael continued. Did she ever make me feel guilty about the sacrifices she was making? No. She told me the bandages were from a cooking accident and went right back to work the next week. Tears were streaming down my face now, but I couldn't stop them. I'd never heard Michael talk about our early years like this with such clarity about what I'd gone through. She put me through school, he continued. She saved every penny so I could go to college, so I could join the military as an officer instead of enlisted. She gave up dating, gave up any chance at her own happiness because she was focused on giving me the best life she could. I didn't know, Brittany started. But Michael cut her off. You didn't know because you never bothered to ask. You never bothered to learn anything about the woman who made me the man you claimed to love. Linda finally found her voice. Michael. Dear, I think you're overreacting. Brittany was just trying to what? He wheeled around to face his mother-in-law. Trying to humiliate my mother. Trying to turn her into your personal cleaning lady. Trying to make her feel worthless. Now see here, young man. Linda's husband finally spoke up. You can't come into our house. And your house? Michael's laugh was harsh and bitter. This is where you've been keeping my mother for 3 weeks, making her sleep in your basement and treating her like hired help. The guest room isn't in the basement, Linda protested weakly. Show me. Michael said flatly. There was an uncomfortable silence. Then Linda reluctantly led us down a narrow staircase to what was essentially a storage room with a cot shoved in the corner. The ceiling was so low that Michael had to duck his head. There was no window, no proper ventilation, and the smell of mildew was overwhelming. "You've been making my mother sleep down here." Michael's voice was barely controlled. "It's perfectly adequate," Linda said defensively. She said she was grateful for any space we could provide. Michael turned to look at me, and I saw something break in his expression. "Mom, why didn't you tell me you were away for training?" I said quietly. "I didn't want to bother you with bother me." He ran his hands through his hair. "Mom, you're never a bother. You're my mother. You're the most important person in my life." Behind us, Brittany made a small sound of protest. "That's right," Michael said, turning to face her. "More important than you, more important than anyone. This woman sacrificed everything for me, and you've been treating her like garbage." "I was just trying to help her feel useful," Brittany said. But her voice was getting smaller. "By making her scrub floors on her hands and knees, by slapping her in front of your parents' friends, by humiliating her. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that." Michael exploded again. "I saw it." "I walked in and saw my mother on her knees crying with your handprint on her face, while a room full of people laughed at her. The truth of it hung in the air like a physical weight. No one could deny what he'd seen. And you know what the worst part is?" Michael continued, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet again. "She was grateful. Even after everything you've put her through, she was grateful for a roof over her head. Because that's who she is. That's who you married into Brittany. A family where we take care of each other, where we respect each other, where we would rather die than see each other suffer." He paused, looking around at all of them. "But that's not who you are, is it?" Brittany's face crumpled. "Michael, please. I love you. I love our family. I was just stressed with having an extra person in the house." "And an extra person?" Michael stared at her in disbelief. "That extra person is my mother. She's not some stranger we picked up off the street. She's the woman who made me who I am. I know that. I just..." "No, you don't know that." "No. If you knew that really knew it, you never would have treated her this way." He turned to me, then his expression softening. "Mom, get your things. We're leaving." "Michael, where will we go?" I asked. "I don't care if we have to sleep in my car," he said firmly. "We're not staying here another minute. You can't just leave," Brittany cried. "We married. We're supposed to work through problems together." Michael looked at her for a long moment. "Some problems can't be worked through, Brittany. Some things are unforgivable." The weight of those words settled over the room like a burial shroud. And as I looked at my daughter-in-law's face, I realized that everything was about to change. But for the first time in 3 weeks, I wasn't afraid of what came next. The silence in that cramped basement room stretched on until I thought it might suffocate us all. Michael stood there, his chest rising and falling with barely controlled rage, while Brittany looked like she was watching her entire world crumble around her. "Ever, please," she whispered, reaching for his arm. "Can we just talk about this privately?" He pulled away from her touch like she'd burned him. "Privately. Like how you privately decided to abuse my mother for 3 weeks while I was gone." "I wasn't abusing her." "Then what would you call it?" His voice was ice cold. "Making her sleep in a basement, forcing her to clean floors she'd already cleaned, slapping her in front of your parents' friends." Brittany's face flushed red. She wasn't doing things properly. Someone had to what? Teach her. Correct her. Michael shook his head in disgust. My mother raised me by herself, worked multiple jobs, kept a household running for decades. You think she doesn't know how to clean a floor? That's when Linda made another terrible mistake. Well, honestly, Michael, people from different backgrounds sometimes have different standards of different backgrounds. Michael turned on his mother-in-law with such fury that she actually took a step backward. What exactly are you implying about my mother's background? Linda stammered, realizing too late that she'd stepped into dangerous territory. I just meant that perhaps she's not used to maintaining a home of this caliber. The word caliber hung in the air like a slap. I felt my cheeks burn with fresh humiliation. But Michael's reaction was volcanic. Caliber, he repeated slowly. You mean because we were poor? Because my mother couldn't afford to live in a house like this? Now Linda's husband tried to interject. Let's all calm down. And no! Michael's voice cut through the basement like a blade. Let's not calm down. Let's talk about caliber. My mother's house might not have been as big as this one, but it was clean. It was warm. It was filled with love. Can you say the same about this place? He gestured around the basement room where they had been keeping me. You put a 66-year-old woman in a basement that smells like mildew and call it hospitality. You make her work like a servant and call it helping out. You humiliate her in front of guests and call it maintaining standards. And you think you're better than us because you have more money. Michael, you're being unfair, Brittany said. But there was desperation creeping into her voice now. My parents opened their home to your mother when she had nowhere else to go. After lying to me about her situation for months, the accusation hit the room like a thunderbolt. I looked at Michael in confusion. What do you mean, lying? Michael's jaw clenched. Mom, when did you lose the house 4 months ago? I said, quietly. But I told you not to worry that I had somewhere to stay. With who? You told me you were staying with Mrs. Whitaker from church. I felt my face flush. I was at first, but her daughter came to visit and needed the room. So where were you staying before you came here? The question hung in the air, and I couldn't meet his eyes. The truth was too humiliating to admit. Mom, where were you staying? In my car, I whispered. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Michael went completely still, his face draining of color. You were sleeping in your car. His voice was barely audible. Just for a few days, I said quickly. It wasn't that bad. The weather was mild, and I had a blanket. A few days, Michael turned to Brittany. How long did you know about this? Brittany's face had gone pale. What do you mean? Don't lie to me, Brittany. How long did you know my mother was homeless? I didn't know she was sleeping in her car. But you knew she'd lost the house. Silence. Answer me. 3 months, Brittany whispered. I've known for 3 months. The betrayal hit Michael like a physical blow. He actually staggered backward. 3 months. My mother has been homeless for 3 months, and you didn't tell me. You were deployed. There was nothing you could do from overseas. Nothing I could do. Michael's voice shook the basement walls. I could have sent money. I could have made arrangements. I could have requested emergency leave. You were in the middle of an important mission. More important than my mother. The question hung in the air, and everyone knew the answer. Nothing was more important to Michael than family. Nothing. How did you find out? He asked, his voice deadly quiet. Brittany glanced nervously at her parents. She called here looking for you. When right after you deployed. She was crying, saying she'd lost the house and didn't know what to do. She asked me to have you call her. My heart sank as I remembered that phone call. I'd been so desperate, so scared. I'd swallowed my pride and called Brittany because I didn't know what else to do. "And what did you tell her?" Michael asked. "I told her you were busy and couldn't be disturbed." And then Brittany looked like she wanted to disappear. She kept calling every few days, always crying, always asking for you. For 3 months, my mother called you asking for help. And you never told me? I handled it. I told her she could come stay here when you got back. You handled it. Michael stared at her in disbelief by letting her sleep in her car for 3 months while you handled it. That's when the full scope of Brittany's deception became clear. She hadn't just hidden my situation from Michael. She'd actively prevented him from finding out, even when she knew I was desperate and alone. "There's more, isn't there?" Michael said, reading something in her expression. "What else haven't you told me?" Brittany's silence was answer enough. "What else, Brittany?" She asked about borrowing money, just a little, to help with a deposit on a small apartment, and I told her we couldn't afford it. Michael laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Couldn't afford it? I have $35,000 in savings. Money I've been putting aside for our future. That money is for us, for our house, our family. My mother is my family." The words echoed through the basement. Final and absolute. And in that moment, I saw Brittany realize that she'd lost. She'd gambled on Michael choosing her over me, and she'd lost everything. "You let my mother sleep in her car," Michael said slowly. "For 3 months, while I had money sitting in the bank that could have helped her. You intercepted her calls for help. You lied to me about her situation. And then when you finally graciously allowed her to come here, you treated her like a servant." He paused, looking around at all of them. "And you thought I'd never find out." "We were going to tell you," Linda said weakly. "Once you were settled back home, you were going to tell me that you'd been abusing my mother." "We weren't abusing her." "Then what would you call making her sleep in a basement and slapping her for not cleaning properly?" No one had an answer for that. Michael turned to me, his expressions soft with pain and guilt. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have checked on you more. I should have called you directly instead of going through Brittany." "You were serving your country," I said quietly. "I didn't want to be a distraction." "You're never a distraction. You're my mother." He took my hands in his, and I saw him notice my missing fingers for the first time in years. His jaw tightened. "I failed you." "No, you didn't." "Yes, I did. I trusted someone who didn't deserve it. I let someone hurt you because I was too blind to see who she really was." He turned back to Brittany, and the look in his eyes was colder than I'd ever seen it. "Pack your things," he said quietly. "What, pack your things? We're done." Brittany's face crumpled. "Michael, no, you can't mean that. We're married. People have fights. They work through them." "This isn't a fight, Brittany. This is you showing me exactly who you are, and I don't like what I see. I can change. I can be better." "You had 3 months to be better. 3 months while my mother was homeless and desperate, calling you for help. And instead of being better, you chose to be cruel." He started walking toward the basement stairs. "Come on, Mom. Let's get your things." "Michael, wait." Brittany grabbed his arm. "You're making a mistake. Your mother is manipulating you. She's making you choose between us." Michael stopped and turned back to her. "No, Brittany. I'm not choosing between you and my mother. I'm choosing between right and wrong, and you're wrong." As we climbed those basement stairs together, I heard Brittany start to cry behind us. Real tears this time, not the fake ones she'd used to manipulate situations. But it was too late for tears. Some things once broken can never be fixed. And my son's trust in his wife was one of them. The car ride to Michael's apartment was quiet, except for the sound of Brittany's sobs echoing from the house we'd left behind. My son's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, and I could see the muscle in his jaw twitching with barely contained emotion. "I should have known," he said, finally breaking the silence. "I should have seen what kind of person she was." "Michael, you couldn't have known." "Yes, I could have." His voice was thick with guilt. There were signs. Mom. Little things. The way she talked about people who had less money than us. The way she treated waiters and store clerks. I told myself it was just her being particular about standards, but it wasn't. It was her showing me exactly who she was, and I chose not to see it. I wanted to comfort him, but I knew he needed to work through this pain in his own way. We drove through the familiar streets of town, and I found myself looking at everything with new eyes. These were places where I'd lived my entire adult life, where I'd raised my son, where I'd built a life with his father before everything fell apart. "I'm not going back to her," Michael said suddenly. "Son, you don't have to make any permanent decisions right now. You're upset, and rightfully so. But no, Mom." He pulled into the parking lot of his apartment complex and turned to look at me. "This isn't something I'm going to get over or work through. What she did to you, the way she treated you, the lies she told, that's not something you come back from." I studied his face, seeing my own stubborn determination reflected there. "Marriage is hard work, Michael. People make mistakes. This wasn't a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to call you back or accidentally hurting your feelings. This was deliberate cruelty. She made a choice to let you suffer, and she made that choice every single day for 3 months." He was right, of course, but I'd spent so many years making excuses for other people's behavior, trying to see the good in everyone, that it was hard to accept that some people simply didn't deserve the benefit of the doubt. "What about your life together, your plans?" Michael was quiet for a moment. What life? What plans? I thought I was building something with someone who shared my values, who understood what family meant, but I was wrong. Brittany doesn't understand family. She doesn't understand loyalty or sacrifice, or putting other people before yourself. We sat in the car for a few more minutes, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Michael got out and came around to help me with my single suitcase, the only possessions I had left in the world. His apartment was small, but comfortable, decorated with the sparse functionality of a military man who'd spent years living out of barracks. There was a couch, a television, a small dining table, and not much else. But it felt warmer and more welcoming than that basement room had ever been. "You can take the bedroom," Michael said, setting my suitcase down. "I'll sleep on the couch." "Absolutely not. I won't put you out of your own bed." "Mom, no arguments. I've been sleeping on a cot in a basement for 3 weeks. Your couch will feel like a luxury hotel." He smiled at that, the first real smile I'd seen from him since he'd walked into that house and found me on my knees. "Okay, but just temporarily. We'll figure out something better." That night, as I lay on his couch listening to him move around in the bedroom, I found myself thinking about the future for the first time in months. Since losing the house, I'd been so focused on just surviving each day that I hadn't allowed myself to think about what came next. But now, surrounded by my son's quiet strength and unconditional love, I began to imagine possibilities again. The next morning, Michael made coffee and toast, and we sat at his small table like we used to when he was young. And it was just the two of us against the world. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what we should do next." "We." "Yes, we." You're not going through this alone anymore, Mom. I should never have let you go through it alone in the first place. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. You were serving your country. You were doing exactly what you should have been doing. Maybe, but that doesn't change the fact that you needed me, and I wasn't here. Before I could respond, there was a knock at the door. Michael's face darkened immediately. Stay here, he said, but I followed him to the door anyway. Through the peephole, we could see Brittany standing in the hallway, still in the same clothes from yesterday, her makeup smeared and her hair disheveled. She'd clearly been crying all night. Michael, please. Her voice came through the door. I know you're in there. We need to talk. There's nothing to talk about. Michael called back. Yes, there is. I love you. I made mistakes, but we can work through this. No, we can't. Please, just let me explain. Let me apologize properly. Michael looked at me, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. Part of him, the part that had loved this woman enough to marry her, wanted to give her a chance to make things right. But the part that had seen his mother humiliated and abused wasn't ready to forgive. 10 minutes, he said, finally unlocking the door. Brittany rushed in her eyes, immediately seeking mine. Evelyn, I'm so sorry. I know I was wrong. I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry. I nodded, but said nothing. Her apology felt hollow, like something she'd rehearsed rather than something she truly felt. I was stressed, she continued, turning back to Michael. Having an extra person in the house trying to make everything perfect for when you came home. I took it out on your mother, and that was wrong. Stressed. Michael's voice was dangerously quiet. You were stressed, so you decided to abuse my mother. I didn't abuse her. You made her sleep in a basement. You forced her to do menial labor. You slapped her. What would you call it? Brittany's face crumpled. I was trying to help her feel useful. I thought if she had things to do, responsibilities, she wouldn't feel like such a burden. The word burden hit me like a physical blow, and I saw Michael's face darken even further. My mother is not a burden, he said slowly. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. That's how you saw her. As a burden, as something you had to deal with until I came home to handle it. Michael, please. And the lies. The 3 months you let her sleep in her car while lying to me about her situation. How do you explain that Brittany was crying again now? Real tears this time. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. You were deployed and I couldn't reach you. And I thought, you thought what? That you could handle my mother's homelessness by ignoring it. I was going to help her when you got back. You were going to what? Keep treating her like a servant. Keep humiliating her. That's when I finally spoke up. Brittany, I said quietly, and both of them turned to look at me. Do you remember what you said to me yesterday, right before you slapped me? She shook her head, but I could see in her eyes that she remembered perfectly. You said maybe if I'd been better at managing my finances, or taking care of my home, or planning for the future, I wouldn't need to depend on other people. I stood up slowly, feeling stronger than I had in months. Do you remember saying that I was upset? I didn't mean... Yes, you did mean it. That's what you really think of me. That's what you've always thought of me. That I'm some kind of failure who brought my problems on myself. That's not true. It is true, and that's why this can't be fixed with apologies and promises to do better. I looked at Michael, then back at Brittany. Some things can't be taken back. Some words can't be unspoken. But I love him, Brittany cried, reaching for Michael. I love you. No, I said firmly, stepping between them. You love the idea of him. You love being married to a soldier, being able to tell people your husband serves his country. You love the security and the respect that comes with that. But you don't love him. That's not true. If you loved him, you would have loved the people who made him who he is. You would have respected the sacrifices that were made so he could become the man you married. You would have seen me as a gift, not a burden. Brittany stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. And if you had truly loved him, I continued, you never would have done anything that would cause him this much pain. The truth of that statement settled over the room like a weight. Michael stood there looking at his wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, and I could see the last of his love for her dying in his eyes. I want you to leave, he said quietly. Now, and don't come back. Brittany looked between us one more time, searching for some crack in our resolve, some way to manipulate the situation back in her favor. But there wasn't one. The damage was done, and we all knew it. After she left, Michael and I sat in silence for a long time. Are you okay? I finally asked. He thought about it for a moment. I think I will be. It hurts right now, knowing that I married someone who could be so cruel. But I'd rather know the truth than live a lie. I'm sorry your marriage is ending because of me. It's not ending because of you, Mom. It's ending because of who she chose to be when she thought no one important was watching. That afternoon, Michael started making phone calls. First to a lawyer about divorce proceedings, then to his commanding officer about changing his emergency contacts and beneficiaries. Finally to a realtor about looking for a bigger apartment, one with 2 bedrooms. You don't have to do that. I told him, I can find my own place. With what money? With what job? He wasn't being cruel, just practical. Mom, you're 66 years old and you've lost everything. There's no shame in letting your son help you get back on your feet. I don't want to be a burden. Don't. His voice was sharp. Don't ever use that word about yourself. You're not a burden. You're my mother. You're the person who sacrificed everything to give me a good life. Now it's my turn to take care of you. That night, as I lay on his couch again, I realized something had shifted inside me. For the first time since losing the house, since becoming homeless, since enduring those 3 weeks of humiliation, I felt something I'd almost forgotten how to feel. I felt hope, and I felt proud. Proud of my son for standing up for what was right. Proud of myself for finally speaking the truth instead of just accepting whatever scraps of dignity people were willing to throw my way. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions to make. But tonight, I was safe. I was loved. And I was no longer alone. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. 4 weeks after leaving Brittany's parents' house, Michael and I had settled into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. He would leave for base early in the morning, and I would spend my days job hunting, apartment searching, and slowly rebuilding the confidence that had been systematically destroyed during those 3 weeks of humiliation. The divorce papers had been filed, and Brittany had been surprisingly quiet since that final confrontation in Michael's apartment. I'd expected more drama, more attempts to win him back, but there had been nothing. It was as if she'd simply vanished from our lives. I heard through a friend that she moved back in with her parents. Michael told me one evening as we sat eating dinner at his small table. Apparently, she's telling everyone that I chose my mother over her. Well, I said, setting down my fork. That's not entirely untrue. It's completely untrue. His voice was firm. I didn't choose you over her. I chose right over wrong. I chose treating people with dignity over treating them like garbage. She just happened to be on the wrong side of that choice. That same week, I got a call that changed everything. Mrs. Monroe. The voice on the phone was warm and professional. This is Donna Reyes from the Maple Grove Community Library. I understand you're looking for employment. I gripped the phone tighter. Yes, I am. Your son gave us your name. He mentioned that you have experience in bookkeeping and administration. Michael had been working his network quietly, reaching out to people he knew who might have opportunities for someone my age. The library was looking for someone to work part-time, managing their volunteer programs and helping with administrative duties. I'd love to come in for an interview, I said, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. The interview was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I spent the weekend researching the library, thinking about how my decades of work experience might translate to this new opportunity. For the first time in months, I felt like I had something to look forward to. Monday night, as I was pressing my best interview outfit, a navy blue dress I'd managed to save from the house, there was a knock at the door. Michael answered it, and I heard a familiar voice that made my blood run cold. I need to talk to Evelyn. Brittany. I came out of the bedroom to find her standing in the doorway, looking smaller somehow than she had 4 weeks ago. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her usual perfect makeup was smeared, and there were dark circles under her eyes. What do you want? Michael's voice was cold. Please, she said, looking directly at me. Just 10 minutes. I need to say something. Against my better judgment, I nodded. 10 minutes. She stepped inside, and I could smell alcohol on her breath. Not drunk, but definitely drinking. I've been thinking, she began, about what happened, about what you said. I waited, saying nothing. You were right, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, about me not really loving Michael. About me loving the idea of being married to him more than loving him. Michael started to speak, but I held up a hand to stop him. I wanted the perfect military wife life, Brittany continued. The respect, the admiration, the security. I wanted to be able to tell people at parties that my husband was a hero, that we were this perfect American family. She paused, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. But I didn't want the reality of it. I didn't want to deal with deployments and worry and the kind of man who would put his mother before his wife. I thought if I could just manage the inconvenient parts, hide them or fix them, I could have the perfect life I wanted. So you decided to manage me? I said quietly. Yes. The admission came out like a sob. I thought if I could just control the situation, make you smaller, less important, less noticeable, then everything would be perfect whenever he came home. By humiliating me, by making me feel worthless. I told myself you were being dramatic, that you were fine, that you were just difficult. She looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. But you weren't difficult. You were grieving and scared and desperate, and I made it worse because it was inconvenient for me. The honesty of it was brutal. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her it was okay, that we all make mistakes. But the larger part of me, the part that had learned to value my own dignity, remained silent. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I did, what I am. She turned to Michael then. And I wanted you to know that you're better off without me. Your mother raised a good man, a man with real values and real love. I would have destroyed that eventually. With that, she turned and walked out, leaving us both staring after her. That was unexpected, Michael said finally. Yes, it was. Does it change anything for you? I thought about it for a moment. It helps to know that she understands what she did. But no, it doesn't change anything. Some damage can't be undone, even with understanding. The next morning, I walked into the Maple Grove Community Library for my interview, feeling more confident than I had in months. Donna Reyes was a woman about my own age with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Tell me about yourself, Mrs. Monroe, she said as we settled into her office. I found myself talking not just about my work experience, but about my life. About raising Michael alone, about the jobs I'd worked, the challenges I'd faced, the recent losses I'd endured. Instead of feeling ashamed of my circumstances, I felt proud of my resilience. You've certainly faced your share of difficulties, Donna said when I finished. How do you think those experiences would help you in this position? I think, I said slowly, that when you've had to rebuild your life from nothing, you understand how important places like this library are. How important it is for people to have somewhere they can go to better themselves, to find resources, to feel valued and respected regardless of their circumstances. Donna smiled. When can you start? I walked out of that library with a job, a purpose, and something I'd thought I'd lost forever, a sense of my own worth. That evening, Michael and I celebrated with dinner at a small restaurant downtown. As we sat across from each other, I looked at my son, this good, strong man I'd raised, and felt a deep sense of pride. You know, I said, I think I owe Brittany a thank you. Michael nearly choked on his water. What if she hadn't shown me exactly how far I'd fallen, how little I'd been valuing myself? I might never have found the strength to stand back up. Mom, you've always been strong. No, I haven't. I've been surviving, which isn't the same thing. For months after your father died, after I lost the house, I just accepted whatever scraps of dignity people were willing to give me. I was so grateful for any kindness that I forgot I deserved to be treated well. I paused, thinking about those 3 weeks in that basement room, about the humiliation I'd endured. But when I saw the look on your face that day, when you walked in and saw me on my knees with a handprint on my cheek, I remembered something I'd forgotten. What's that? That I raised you to be better than that, to stand up for what's right, to protect people who can't protect themselves, to value character over convenience. And if I raised you to be that kind of man, then I must be that kind of woman. Michael reached across the table and took my hand. You are, Mom. You always have been. 3 months later, I was settled into my new job and loving every minute of it. The library had become my sanctuary, a place where I was valued for my experience and treated with the respect I'd forgotten I deserved. I'd also found something unexpected: friendship. The other volunteers were a mix of retirees and younger people, all united by a love of books and learning. For the first time in years, I had a social circle that had nothing to do with my role as someone's mother or wife. One afternoon, as I was organizing a display of new acquisitions, a man approached the desk. "Excuse me," he said. "I'm looking for information about your volunteer literacy program." I looked up to see a distinguished gentleman about my age, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I'm Thomas," he said, extending his hand. "I just retired from teaching high school English, and I'm hoping to stay busy." "I'm Evelyn," I replied, shaking his hand. "And I think you'll find we have several programs that could use someone with your experience." As I walked him through the various volunteer opportunities, I found myself enjoying the conversation more than I had expected. Thomas was articulate and passionate about education, but also funny and self-deprecating in a way that put me at ease. "Would you like to grab coffee sometime?" he asked as our meeting concluded. "I'd love to hear more about your experiences here." I hesitated for just a moment, then smiled. "I'd like that." That evening, I called Michael to tell him about my day, including my coffee date with Thomas. "Mom, that's great," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "You deserve to have good things in your life. It's just coffee," I protested. "It's a beginning," he corrected, "and beginnings are important." As I hung up the phone, I realized he was right. This was a beginning, not just with Thomas, but with this new version of myself. The version that knew her worth, that refused to accept less than she deserved, that understood the difference between surviving and truly living. I looked around Michael's apartment, which had been my home for the past few months, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. Not just for the roof over my head, but for the journey that had brought me here. For the son who had stood up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself. For the wake-up call that had reminded me who I really was. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new possibilities. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged, surrounded by love, strengthened by adversity, and ready for whatever came next. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was truly happy. 8 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my own apartment, a small but bright one-bedroom place just 15 minutes from the library, making coffee for two. Through the window, I could see the sunrise painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and I felt that familiar surge of gratitude that had become my morning ritual. The apartment wasn't much. Second-hand furniture, discount store, curtains, a kitchen table that wobbled slightly, but it was mine. Every stick of furniture, every dish in the cupboard, every book on the shelf had been chosen by me, paid for with money I'd earned through my own work. After months of feeling like a burden, like someone who existed at the mercy of others, charity, having my own space, felt like a miracle. Thomas emerged from the bathroom, his silver hair still damp from the shower. We'd been dating for 5 months now, taking things slowly, learning each other's rhythms and histories, with the careful patience of people who understood that real love was worth waiting for. "Coffee smells wonderful," he said, dropping a kiss on the top of my head as he passed. "I made your favorite," I replied, handing him a mug. "Extra strong, just a touch of cream." This was our Saturday morning routine. Thomas would stay over Friday nights, and we'd spend Saturday morning reading the paper together, discussing current events, and sharing stories from our weeks. It was a quiet kind of happiness, the kind I'd never thought I'd have again. "Any plans for today?" he asked, settling into the chair across from me. "Michael's coming over for lunch. He wants to show me something." Thomas smiled. He'd met my son several times now, and the two men had developed a genuine respect for each other. Thomas understood that Michael would always be the most important man in my life, and Michael appreciated that Thomas treated me with the kindness and respect I deserved. "He's been mysterious about it all week," I continued. "Just keep saying he has something to show me." An hour later, Thomas headed home to tend to his garden, and I spent the morning cleaning and preparing lunch for Michael's visit. As I worked, I found myself thinking about how much had changed in the past year. The library job had been a lifesaver in more ways than one. Not only had it given me financial independence, but it had restored my sense of purpose. I loved helping people find the resources they needed. Whether it was a job seeker looking for career guidance or an elderly patron learning to use a computer. Every day reminded me that I had value, that my experience and wisdom were assets rather than burdens. I'd also discovered that I was braver than I'd ever imagined. Last month, when a patron had become verbally abusive toward one of the younger volunteers, I'd stepped in, without hesitation, calmly but firmly, escorting the man out, and making it clear that disrespectful behavior wouldn't be tolerated. The old Evelyn, the one who had accepted Brittany's abuse because she was grateful for a roof over her head, would never have done that. Michael arrived at noon carrying a manila folder and wearing the kind of smile that meant he was up to something. "What's in the folder?" I asked, hugging him tight. "Patience, Mom." Lunch first, then surprises over grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. His favorite meal since childhood, we caught up on his week. The divorce from Brittany had been finalized 4 months ago, and while I knew he was still healing from the betrayal, he seemed lighter these days, more like the young man I'd raised than the conflicted husband he'd become. Have you heard from her at all? I asked carefully. We rarely talked about Brittany anymore, but sometimes I wondered. Not directly, but I heard she moved to Colorado, got a job with some tech company. He paused, considering I hope she finds whatever it is she's really looking for. I was proud of him for that. It would have been easy to hold on to anger, to wish bad things for someone who had caused so much pain. But Michael had chosen to let go of the bitterness, to focus on building something better rather than dwelling on what had been destroyed. Now, he said, finishing his sandwich. Are you ready for your surprise? He opened the folder and pulled out what looked like real estate listings. My heart sank a little. I loved my apartment, loved my independence. If he was trying to convince me to move somewhere else, somewhere he thought would be better for me. Michael, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm happy where I am. I know you are. That's not what this is about. He spread the papers across the table. These are houses, Mom. Houses I could afford with my savings and my military benefits. I looked at the listings confused. I don't understand. I want to buy a house, a real house with a yard and extra bedrooms and space for both of us. He leaned forward, his eyes bright with excitement. I want us to live together again, Mom. Not because you need taken care of, but because I miss having you in my life every day. The words hit me like a warm wave. Michael, I know you're independent now. I know you can take care of yourself, but that doesn't mean we have to live separately. We're family. We're a team. We always have been. I studied the listings, seeing not just houses, but possibilities. A garden where I could grow vegetables like I used to. A kitchen big enough for Thomas to help me cook dinner. A guest room for when friends from the library came to visit. What about your future? I asked. What about when you meet someone, when you want to start a family of your own? Then we'll figure it out when that happens. But right now, this is what I want. This is what would make me happy. I looked at my son, this good, generous man, who had saved me in more ways than he would ever know, and felt my heart swell with love and pride. Show me your favorites, I said. We spent the afternoon driving around, looking at houses, discussing the pros and cons of each one. By evening, we'd found it. A modest 3-bedroom house with a big front porch and a backyard perfect for barbecues. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and welcoming, the kind of place where memories could be made. This one feels right, I said as we stood in the living room, imagining our furniture arranged around the stone fireplace. It does. Michael agreed. It feels like home. That evening, over dinner with Thomas, I shared our news. I was nervous about his reaction, worried that he might feel like our relationship was being complicated by my living situation. That's wonderful, he said immediately. Michael's a good man, and you two have something special. Besides, he grinned, that house has a much better kitchen than your apartment. I'm looking forward to cooking in it. The assumption that he would be welcome, that our relationship would continue and grow in this new setting, filled me with warmth. This was what healthy relationships look like. Flexibility, support, and the understanding that love enhanced life rather than constraining it. 4 months later, we moved into our new house. Michael took the master bedroom. I claimed the sunny room overlooking the garden, and we turned the 3rd bedroom into a study where I could work on library projects and Michael could handle his military paperwork. The housewarming party was small but perfect. Thomas brought wine and helped me set up the buffet. Donna from the library came with her husband, along with several of my volunteer friends. A few of Michael's military buddies showed up with their families, and suddenly our quiet house was filled with laughter and conversation. As I stood on the back porch watching Thomas show some of the kids how to identify different bird species in our yard while Michael grilled burgers and shared stories with his friends, I felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what I'd been working toward my entire life without even realizing it. Not the perfect house or the perfect family, but this, a life built on authentic relationships, mutual respect, and genuine love. "You look happy," Donna said, joining me on the porch. "I am happy," I replied, and meant it completely. For the first time in a very long time, I'm exactly where I belong. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and the dishes were washed, Michael and I sat on the front porch swing, watching the stars come out. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked. "The divorce, starting over, all of it?" He considered the question seriously. "I regret that I married someone who could be cruel to you. I regret that I wasn't there when you needed me most. But I don't regret leaving her, and I don't regret this." He gestured toward the house, toward our new life. "This feels right in a way that my marriage never did." "What about when you meet someone new? Then I'll meet someone who understands that you're part of the package. Someone who sees having you in our lives is a blessing, not a burden." He paused. "Someone like Thomas sees you." The comment made me smile. Thomas and I had been talking about moving in together, taking the next step in our relationship. The prospect excited rather than frightened me, which seemed like a good sign. "You know what the best part is? Michael continued watching you become yourself again. The real you, not the version you thought you had to be to deserve love." His words reminded me of that terrible day when Brittany had slapped me. When I'd been on my knees scrubbing a floor that was already clean, accepting humiliation because I'd forgotten I deserved better. I almost lost myself completely. I admitted if you hadn't come home when you did, but I did come home, and you found your strength again. That's what matters. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of our neighborhood. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A car drove by with music playing softly. The ordinary sounds of ordinary people living ordinary lives. It struck me that this was what happiness really looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, but quiet evenings on front porches with people who loved you. Kitchen tables where you felt safe to be yourself. Work that gave you purpose. Relationships built on respect rather than need. "I love you, son," I said quietly. "I love you too, Mom. Always." 8 months later, Thomas and I were married in a small ceremony in our backyard. Michael walked me down the makeshift aisle, and Donna from the library served as my maid of honor. It wasn't the wedding of a young woman's dreams, but it was perfect for who I was now. A woman who had learned the difference between love and need, between partnership and dependence. As Thomas and I exchanged vows under the oak tree in our backyard, surrounded by the people who had become our chosen family, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The loss, the humiliation, the dark period when I'd forgotten my own worth, but also the awakening, the rediscovery of my strength, the slow rebuilding of a life based on dignity rather than desperation. "I promise," I said, looking into Thomas's kind eyes, "to love you, not because I need you, but because I choose you. Every day I choose you. And I promise," he replied, "to love the strong, independent woman. You are not some version of you that needs fixing or saving." That evening, as we cleaned up from the reception, I found myself alone in the kitchen for a moment. Through the window, I could see Michael and Thomas setting up a fire in the backyard fire pit, laughing about something. The sight filled me with a contentment so complete it almost took my breath away. I thought about Brittany, sometimes wondered if she'd found whatever it was she'd been searching for. I hoped she had learned, as I had, that real happiness couldn't be built on other people's diminishment. That love wasn't about control or manipulation, but about seeing and celebrating the best in each other. But mostly, I thought about gratitude. Gratitude for the son who had stood up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself. For the second chance at love that I'd never expected. For the work that gave my days meaning, for the community that had embraced me exactly as I was. I'd lost a house, but I'd found a home. I'd lost a sense of security, but I'd gained something more valuable. The knowledge that I could survive anything, could rebuild from nothing, could create a life worth living, no matter what circumstances tried to define me. At 67 years old, I was finally exactly who I was meant to be, and that I realized was worth everything I'd had to endure to get here. The future stretched ahead of us, full of possibilities I couldn't yet imagine. But whatever came next, I would face it with dignity, with love, and with the unshakable knowledge that I deserved all the happiness I could create. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.